Oops, there we go. That's weird. Right, so continuing from... Oh, so I wonder if that's why... interesting. Anyway, so continuing on from previous streams, we are going to work on the Artabike. And we're going to add a simple animation to the furniture item. So what we've done so far is, so Twitch, Artabike 5. So that's what we've got so far. And of course, because we are in a white box with no other objects in the scene, we can't tell if this is doing anything. So we need to load in something as reference. And we have made a special widget for this. So if you want this widget and you are watching, send JazzCat a message on IMVU and you'll get it as a freebie. So message JazzCat. So that's our reference point, because we're going to add an animation to the Artabike so that it just bobs up and down. Oh, I did. So number 4. So from yesterday, the pose has been tidied up a little bit. So if you look at the fingers, the hand is essentially left in its default position. So all the fingers are pointing. Well, it's not pointing, it's a handshake. They're in their default position. And she's leaning back a bit too far. So after the stream, we just updated that. So she now looks as if she's gripping the handles of the handlebar and she's not leaning back quite so much. So that was just a question of doing the same thing that was done to the pose itself in order to get the avatar to actually pose. So that's bending all the bones. But that was also done to the fingers, to get the fingers to wrap around the handlebar. So take a quick look at that. Let me see if I can disable the X-ray, because that's where's X-ray? There we go. So we can see the fingers a little better now, but they now wrap around the handlebars. So that was, as with the pose, just a question of going into pose mode or being in pose mode and selecting the individual bones. And just manipulating them using the widget. In this instance, the rotate widget. And doing that to all the fingers. And the different bones that are present, and again oriented in different ways relative to the position. Well, it's relative to the 3D Studio Max originals, that this replicates. So that's all that was done for that. But for our Mark 11. So to add an animation so that this bobs up and down, we have to modify the project a little bit. So we can keep everything as it currently is in terms of its position relative to, so the seating and the seat nodes, they can all stay where they are. The root node can stay where it is, but at the moment the root node controls everything, and for an animation we need to change that because the root node should never be animated. You shouldn't touch that because the root node of furniture items is the node that IMVU uses to locate objects in the room. So when you are decorating a room or adding furniture, the root node is the thing that positions your furniture item within a room, and it should never animate. But to add an animation, that then means that because we can't move this, we have to add another node or another control bone. So that can be an actual another node, or if this were a more complicated object, it would be a bone of an armature. And the way that we can do that using the nodes, so the easiest way to do this is, well, we can either add one, so add, and what you're actually adding is an empty object cube, but they are tiny, which then means you'd have to adjust the size of the object. Otherwise they're difficult to select and difficult to use. So you can either do it that way, delete that, or you can duplicate one of the nodes that already exist within the project. For a furniture item like this, either or works. So let's use the, let me just reload this file so we've got it reset and clean. So what we'll do here is add the node, add, and I'm just going to add a cube, and it adds a teeny tiny cube, which is often hidden inside something. So as we just saw, we go into Object Data Properties, which is this icon. Use Annotate Tools. That's that icon. And then we can change the size of the node itself. Don't rescale this. You need to actually change the physical properties of the node itself. So 125, and that makes it nice and big. Give this a name. So Object Properties. So that's that button. Object Properties. We want to click in this field. Let's just call it Heart of Bike. Right, so at the moment nothing is connected to this, so if we select it, make sure it's selected, press the G key, nothing moves with this. So we need to now associate everything to do with the furniture items. So that's the seating. So that's the seating, the seat nodes, or the pose nodes. Those, well, these two actually don't need to be, but anything that's going to move with the mesh needs to be linked to the node that we just created. Because right now it's connected to root. So we can select those. Select, that's shift right click the node that we just created and parent those to that object. So object keep transform. So that now means that that node controls seating. But the root node controls everything else. So select the mesh. I'm going to make a modification to this. Object data properties. That's that button. Object data properties. And we need to change the vertex group. Double click and rename that Heart O Bike. Well, in this instance it's Heart O Bike, but whatever the control node, the name of the control node that's going to be controlling the animation, that's what the vertex group should be called. So make sure, edit mode, make sure that's assigned to everything. And it is, so that's okay, exit, and then right click, shift right click the control node, and then parent, object, keep transform. So we've now got that control node controlling the mesh and the seating, but the root node controls, well, it's just the catcher and pitcher nodes at the moment, which is fine. So we now need to connect the control node to the root node. So select, and again, parent, object, keep transform. So what we're doing here is creating a hierarchy of control. So we have the root node, and then we have all the other elements that should be parented eventually to the root node, which sits at the top of the tree for the object. But because we're animating, the bits that animate need to be parented to the object that controls that. So because the catcher and pitcher don't need to be animated, they can still remain parented to the root node, whereas everything else is parented to the control. So when that moves, the catcher and pitcher stay where they are. So let's save this. Save as 12. That's 12. Hi King. Can do. We can make clothing items. Do you mean make clothing items in Blender, or do I make clothing items? Not quite sure how long the delay is, so let me just test that. So move 1, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Oh, 5 seconds. That's pretty good. It's better than it's been before. Nice. So what were we doing? Oh, save the file. Right, so we've basically set up the file to accept an animation now. And it was as simple as doing that, of just adding an extra node that is going to be used as the control that will be animated, that everything that is to be animated links to. So once we've got that, we can do a simple animation. So using your front, side, left, so the shortcut keys for that are numpad 1, numpad 1, that's front, numpad 3, that's the right side, numpad 7, which is top view, and then numpad 5 toggles you in and out of 3D or perspective, 3D perspective, or orthogonal or orthogonal, however you pronounce that. So we want the right side. For our animation, we need to switch the timeline to the dope sheet, and then switch the dope sheet to the action editor. And all we're going to do is set up what are called some keyframes. So at key frames, hence the name keyframes, at key positions within the timeline, which is this bit at the bottom, we'll insert some positional data or coordinates. And those over a string of a long string of frames. So we might do 120, I don't know, 120 frames played back or played through in IMVU. That will create our animation. So first thing we need to do is set a start pose. So make sure the control node is selected. It is. And then just press the I key, I for insert, and it'll bring us this pop-up menu, or object animation insert keyframe. So that's the menu pathway to it. Shortcut is just to press the I key, and all we want is location, rotation, and there is our first keyframe. So we can rename this. Double click, heart bike. Hello, Black Widow, Wolf. Dagnabbit. So what we need to do, I wonder if, let me think. So okay, so what we need to do, this is going to be what's called a cycling or repeatable animation. So it'll go on an infinite cycle. When it's active, it'll be infinitely looping. And the way to get that to work, what you ought to look for is that your start frame 1 and your end frame, let's 120, they should be the same. So you can do this at any point, and you'll likely need to do it depending on the complexity of your animations. You might need to do this at several occasions during animating. But we've got our first frame, frame 120. Do the same thing again. So press the I key. So move the mouse over the 3D view, otherwise a different menu pops up. So doing that, pressing the I key with the mouse over the timeline gives us a different menu option. So we want location and rotation. So we've now got 2 frames and they're exactly the same. And that's indicated or highlighted by this orange bar. So we can do a very, very simple animation. So we've got 120 frames in the middle, frame 60. All we need to do is just move that up. So we're just grabbing the widget handles. And again, insert keyframe. Just moving the mouse to one side so that the menu pops up, but you can still see what's going on screen. So location and rotation, and that's inserted a keyframe. And note that the indicator's disappeared now because there's an interruption between the first and last frame. But that gives us a very simple animation. And that is literally all you need to do. 120 might be a bit short actually, so let's do 240. So you've created your sequence, but it's too short. Right click the end node, so it's this one. There are 2, but you want the bottom one really. Just select the bottom one. Right click that, press the G key, G for grab, and just drag it along the timeline to 240. And then left click to set it into place. And the timeline automatically snaps these 2 individual frames. So every time you move something, it'll snap to the frame. So repeat the process and just move that. So we now have an animation that will run for 240 frames. So we can check this in Blender in render properties. So that's this one. It's the camera. And we want to change these settings. Well, we actually just need to change the end frame, really, that's all. So left click, 240. And then move the mouse back over the 3D view, and is it Alt A? It's press Alt A, or which are the animation controls? This is the problem with getting so used to using the shortcuts. Forget where the menu options are. Oh, there we go. Playback animation. It's in view. So view, playback animation. So that's Alt A. Ooh, this might be very, very slow because we're rendering and capturing at the same time. That is super slow. Hello, Liana. That is super slow. But as you watch it make the transition from the end frame to the first frame and it loops back on itself, it repeats the animation and it does so smoothly. And that's what you're looking for with your cycling animations. So for simple furniture items like this, that's relatively straightforward. But if you have a more complicated animation where you've got lots of things going on at the same time, you've got to keep in mind that particularly furniture or rooms where you can have multiple animations running at the same time, only look at your it's well, just it's best to do your animations and set up the looping sequencing correctly relative to the individual animations, because you can then assemble it all in IMVU in an editor and get everything working properly. Oh, don't worry about missing yesterday's, Liano. They're all archived. So if you go into Catspit's profile page on Twitch, you'll see the previous two that we did. Alright, so I'll stop that now. So press the escape key. But what you might also want to do, to avoid it looking too regular, instead of having 240 frames split in the middle at 120, what you can do is just offset it slightly. So you end up with a slightly slower rise and then a slightly quicker drop. But there's lots of things that you could do with the animation. So let's save this. Save as. This is number 13. Lucky for some.